The Mind Buzz, now partnered with My Grito Industries.
3, 2, 1. José Olivarez, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for taking the time and doing the podcast. I really appreciate it. So I'm very grateful. We are both grateful that you are doing this. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this.
Awesome, man. So you right now you are in New Jersey, correct?
Yes.
So how's that? How's it being out there? Originally, you're from Chicago, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago and around Chicago, and I've been living in New Jersey now for 2.5 years. And it's pretty great. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know much about New Jersey before I moved out this way, and I really love it. It's really close to New York, and New York is cool, but it's a little bit more quiet and chill, which is good for me as a writer, I think.
Oh, okay, that's good. So when exactly did you said 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, November 2020.
Oh, okay, and when is that when you wrote Promises of Gold?
Yeah, so I wrote the majority of Promises of Gold in New Jersey after moving here. Um, and I think you can see it in some of the poems. Some of the poems take place in New York. A lot of the poems still take place in Chicago and in Calumet City, where I grew up. But there are a couple poems that are definitely, I can tell, I remember exactly where I was when I wrote them.
Oh, and by the way, for our audience, Jose Olivares is he's a poet, and he has two published books with his poems. Is that correct, or do you have more than that I don't know?
Yeah, I have two books of poems, and then I have a couple of collaborative projects. So I have a project with a photographer in Phoenix named Antonio Salazar. That project is called Por Siempre. It's a book of photos and poems. And
Oh,
then,
that's cool. That sounds awesome.
yeah. And then the last project is an anthology of LatiNext poetry that came out in 2020. So I've been trying to stay busy.
Yeah, it seems like it. How long have you been writing for?
I started writing when I was in high school. Both of my parents are from Jalisco, Mexico. And growing up, what they told us was like, first things first, you got to get your education. Um, listen to your teachers, don't talk back, try to be quiet and, just follow the rules. And that was working for me up until a certain point. And when I got to high school and I started to have questions about, how was it that my family ended up in Chicago of all places, hella far from, you know, Cañadas de Obregón, Jalisco, where my parents grew up. And why did my parents have to leave? And then also like, questions about race and ethnicity and sex and all these things. I just felt like, I needed a place to kind of start imagining and asking questions, and poetry became that place for me.
Wow. So that was your outlet. Writing was your outlet. So was it first poetry first, or how did that happen? Because there's I even like in people that have written comedy or written prose or written different fiction or nonfiction. Sometimes it doesn't start off as nonfiction. It starts off first as something else at the beginning, and then it slowly transitions to a different style of writing. Is that what happened with you you writing your poetry, or was it first poetry and then you just started poetry and just kept with it?
Yeah. So I guess for me, the first thing was I wanted to be a rapper, and I was very bad at rapping. So that didn't work out for me. Um, But I was really into hip hop.
Okay.
Actually, some of my cousins from LA, they got me into like Cypress Hill and a lot of the West Coast stuff. And so I was trying to write raps like Be Real and all of them, and it wasn't working for me. Um, and so from there, at my high school, we had something called the Poetry Slam Club, and I had no idea what it was, but I had an opportunity to go see a performance in our auditorium and get out of chemistry. So I was like, you know, I don't know what Poetry Slam is, but it's a chance to get out of chemistry, so I'm gonna go. And when I saw like my classmates read their poems, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of like rap music, but it feels like something that might be a little bit more approachable for me, right? I didn't have like the immediate talent for writing rhymes and thinking about like intricate rhyme schemes. And so I was like, maybe if I cut out the rhymes and I focus on imagery and style, then I'll have something that I can work with. And so for me, that immediately it became poetry because of the Poetry Slam. And
So
it could have been something else. Go ahead.
What's the difference between regular poetry and slam poetry? Is there like a significant difference?
Kind of.
Okay.
Slam poetry tends to be a little bit longer, and because you get 3 minutes, right? And you want to use your whole time because, it gives you a chance to really tell a story and get people invested. And so Poetry Slam ends up having its own form, right? There's like, usually the poet wants you to believe that it's going to be one thing. And then with about a minute left, there's like a turning point. And in poetry, we call that the volta. And then you kind of run full speed towards whatever the ending is. And in Poetry Slam, usually you like an ending that is going to leave them like clapping really loudly. So a big punchy ending. But that's not too different from poetry that you read in a book, because that also has like a lot of the same kind of formula, right? You still want something that has a turning point. You still want an ending that leaves people feeling something, whether it's something big and profound or something a little bit more like introspective, So they're very similar to me. It just so happens that I started out in one and then I moved towards writing and publishing poetry.
Okay. I was gonna ask, like, you coming from, are you first generation? Are your parents born in Jalisco?
Yeah, my parents were born in Jalisco.
So what did your parents think when you decided that poetry and doing that was like your career? Because I couldn't. I mean, I'm hoping that your parents were, respectful and were okay with what you were doing. But I'm first generation too, so I kind of know how that goes. When you want to get into anything creative, it's like, it's not a real job or anything like that, or at least on my end. What was your experience with that, with having like your parents and your culture and everything behind what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think poetry was a real job. You know what I mean? I didn't know it could be a real job. So I'm first generation, and I went to college, thinking that I was going to study government and political science and eventually become a lawyer. I thought that I was like, maybe I'll run for office somewhere someday. And when I got to college, I hated the political science class that I took. That it was taught by like this old conservative white man. And at the time I was like, oh, that's perfect. I'll go and then we can exchange ideas, right? Like we can have a conversation and my classmates will learn something from me and I'll learn something from them. Yeah. And I think what I found out is that, politics is not about finding that middle ground. It's about people really trying to, people come to the class with their ideas preset and they're not trying to necessarily understand something that is different from those ideas. And it just killed me because we would be in these government classes talking about, poor people, about immigrants, and they'd be talking about them like they were hypothetical. And I would be like, oh, that's my tío. You know what I mean? Like, those are my cousins. And so it just felt like we couldn't really have a conversation. But so then after that, my plan was to become a teacher. And ultimately, I kept finding my way back to poetry. When I started kind of writing professionally, my parents definitely didn't understand. They would just tell, they would tell people that I asked, they'd be like, oh, Jose, he teaches, he's a teacher. And I'd be like, yeah, I teach some days. Other days I do performances, but they just, mostly they were just like, why do you have to be such a chismoso? You know what I mean? Why do you have to tell all these family stories? So that was their main response.
That's funny. I I think I agree, and I wonder why this stigma, right? And I think it's like I always think of that because I wanted to go to culinary school right out of high school,
Mm,
and my mom was like, "No, go to college. Once you get your degree, if you still feel like you want to do it, then go back." And to me, it was like you're making it seem like it's just a hobby, that art
mhm.
is a hobby, and for a lot of people it's not. And I went the route of going to college, and I ended up dropping out because it wasn't for me. And I lost all that time in being able to go to culinary school. I mean, I ended up full circle, and now we work in something that I like and that I love, but still it was that behind it. And I agree with you 100% where they try to make it seem like you're doing something else and that you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is so much, we're at a period in history where everything is changing so fast. And so, part of the mentality is like, how are you going to pay your bills and are you going to be safe?
Yeah.
But the thing is, there are no safe jobs. You know what I mean? Like, you see what's going on in tech right now and in different fields where there, hella layoffs, no matter what field you're in. And so
Yeah.
it's just like we live in a time period where like no job is safe. And so rather than, trying to live a life that is kind of driven by fear, it's like if you plant the seeds and really try and you, I mean, you have to get lucky too. I'm not going to deny that, but there's ways to make a living doing, lots of different things. And so I think that's something that maybe it's hard for our parents, especially when they're, recent immigrants and they made hella sacrifices for them to get like, that nothing is as safe as it looks.
Yeah, and I think as time moves forward, there's become a lot more opportunities with creatives like writers, creatives like people in podcasting, YouTubers. Imagine going back in time and telling somebody, oh yeah, there's gonna be a 5-year-old making millions of dollars just by playing with toys on YouTube. They think you're freaking nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is happening now. It's been happening within the past at least decade. So I am just just thinking about it. Just it throws me into a whirlwind of like what's gonna happen in the next 5 years. Like what is gonna like creatively like jobs will tend to change, and just like you were saying, things are happening with tech, and I'm gonna ask you about that. I don't know. So what's happening in the tech world right now?
Well, there just have been consistent layoffs across a
Mm,
lot of the big tech companies that for a long time people, if you had a job at Facebook or at Google, those are high quality, high paying jobs. And those
right.
are companies that you think about as being huge. Amazon, too big to fail. And they're laying people off. And not just, at every level is what I should say, right? They're laying people off who work in marketing, who work in, you know, they're laying off coders, like every level. I mean, I
Wow.
know that yeah. And so you look at that and it's like, you know, maybe at a certain period in time, if you had a job at Apple, you know, in the 90s and you were like one of the ones who knew how to code in that age and time, then yeah, your job was probably pretty safe because even if you left Apple, you know, you could find another job. But now, I mean, it's changing, and also, you know, the recession is real. Like a lot, like we'll see what happens next. But yeah, it really feels like jobs are changing right now.
Yeah, definitely. That's crazy, and especially even Amber was before we jumped on to record the podcast. She was sharing with me about like all these writers from like different what was it, television shows and TV shows.
Movies, the things that are happening
Yeah.
here with the Writers Guild, that they're all on
Yeah.
strike, and there's all these, you know, shows on pause and things like that that hadn't happened since like 2020, and then even moving back more. So yeah, that's it. It is crazy.
Yeah, there's definitely something happening. There's a pivotal something going on as of right now. It's wild.
So I was gonna ask, you know, you said that you grew up in Chicago, and I know that in Chicago there's a big like Mexican population, right? But also, I was also thinking when you were saying that when you went to college, and you know, a lot of your professors were giving you these lessons on immigration and things like that, right? And you said like they were speaking on it hypothetically, but you really embodied it, right? You knew someone, your aunt, your parents, and everything like that. And I feel like for us here living in California, because we have the largest like population, you know, like Mexican Americans, that I experienced that, but I didn't experience it as much because even our teachers were, you know, like first generations here, things like that. So how different is it living? Well, I mean, you've only lived in Chicago, right? So you don't know, or have, I mean, other than New York, have you ever lived in California?
I've never lived in
Okay.
California, no. So I only know Chicago, and then I know a little bit of the East Coast.
East Coast. So I was gonna say, like, how is the like Mexican culture there in Chicago? Like, is there a big, I guess I don't know how. I'm like, what word would I say? Like community, you know? Is it like, because here in LA and Los Angeles, it's predominantly, you know, Latinos and Mexicans. Is that how it is in Chicago, or is it like more of a melting pot type of thing?
Yeah, so Chicago has, you know, not just a huge Mexican community, but multiple huge Mexican communities. Three historic Mexican communities that go back to the 1900s. Um, you're talking about, you know, the community that came to a neighborhood in Chicago called Back of the Yards, where there were all of these like meat packing and slaughterhouse jobs and working on the train yards. That community has been there in force since the early 1900s. Um, there's another community that's like, uh, you know, a little bit on the northwest side, I want to say, and I know less about that one. But then the third one is the community of Mexicans that came to South Chicago to work in the steel mills, um, and that is, you know, the route that is ultimately what pulled my family to Chicago, was work in the steel mills. Um, but when we lived in Chicago, I mean, the first 6 years of my life, I didn't really know that we were not in Mexico. I mean, my neighborhood, the grocery store, you know, the little corner store was run by a Mexican. My preschool, the teachers all spoke Spanish. We were supposed to be learning English, but nobody spoke English. You know, television, we only watched Telemundo and whatever. You know what I mean? Like
Whoa.
nowhere. We went to church. You know, there was nothing that took place in our lives that happened in English during those years. And so it wasn't until we moved from South Chicago to Calumet City, just a little ways out in the suburbs, that I realized what it meant to live in, you know, in the United States or outside of our little bubble. Um, I'm sorry, I feel like I got off track. But to answer your
No.
question, you know, Chicago at this point is really, it has three major populations. It's about 33% white American, about 33% Black American, and about 33% Mexican American.
Oh, wow.
There's like some, you know, there's a Puerto Rican population that is important and strong. There's an Asian American population too, and an indigenous population. And those numbers are there too. But pretty much the three major groups are Black, white, and Mexican.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I always think of because like you're saying, like you didn't know that you weren't in Mexico until you moved out, right? And I feel
Mhm.
like I come from a city, it's called Paramount, and Paramount is predominantly people like Mexican people, but a lot of people from Sinaloa. So that's where my dad's from. So a lot of people migrated to this city, and it's predominantly people from Sinaloa. So when I was going to school, elementary, high school, I mean, I've lived there my entire life. I moved when I was like a year old there. And once I got out of high school and I started going to college and I started going to these other places, I came out of my bubble and I realized, oh man, like I mean, obviously, you know, there was other groups, you know, people of color in my school, but here I was having to interact, right? In white America, or what we want to call it. And I feel like it was so hard for me to assimilate and be able to kind of still be true to myself. And then at some point also I had like you know, like imposter syndrome and things like that. Is there anything like that that you've ever faced with like writing or even just like anything in general?
Yeah. I mean, it's a trip. I mean, you know, the first thing that I remember was like when I started going to school in kindergarten in English, before I was allowed to go to class, I had, you know, my principal called my mom to the office and I had to have a meeting with the principal, me and my mom. And the principal was like, we were basically one of the first Mexican families to move into Calumet City. And so the principal was like, look, we don't really have anything to help your son out. Like, we don't really have any bilingual teachers. And so you have, you know, they made my mom promise that she would teach me how to speak English, even though, you know, she didn't speak English herself.
Wow.
Um, and so, you know, my relationship with school from the very beginning was one where, like, you know, the language that I spoke in, I didn't want to speak in because I didn't want to get in trouble and because I didn't want to let my mom down. And then the language that I was learning, I didn't want to speak English because I was going to mess up a word and then have my classmates make fun of me. Um, and when, you know, I was thinking about this not too long ago, but like that really drove me. I was like, oh, I'm going to speak English so well that like none of these dudes are going to be able to laugh at me. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to speak it better than someone that was born in this country and has been speaking it for generations. And I think that kind of, I mean, to go back to poetry, I think that's part of why I was drawn to the poetry slam. It was a competition, right? And for me, like, I developed this competitive edge when I was in school where I was like, all of these people, you know, are laughing at me, they're laughing at my family. I'm going to try my best to like make sure that they can never laugh at me again. Um, when I got to college, you know, I don't know, it feels like at some point that competitive streak can get unhealthy. You know what I'm saying? So, um, yeah, I definitely have felt similarly. Um, and also have felt like the other thing was like, no matter how much I learned English, I was never going to be accepted as one of them. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
When did
it just
you
feel
when did you reach to that point? I'm sorry to cut you off. To where you realized that.
probably when I went to Harvard. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, I went to Harvard for undergrad, and I was like, I was like, oh, we made it. I made
Yeah.
it. And you know, I'll never forget. I was like hanging out with my friends over by the river. It was beautiful, and they were like these drunken frat bros, and they just, you know, they wanted to pick a fight with us, and they started calling us names and saying racist things to us, and I was just like, it doesn't, I could get a Harvard degree, I could make $1 million, I could do all of these different things, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It just, there's no level of achievement that's going to erase who you are or where you're from.
Yeah, I agree. Wow, it gave me chills thinking of that, and it's kind of it's sad that we live in that type of um you know America, I guess you would say. The hardest you try and you still will never fit in. I think also it's like a lot of identity, like for myself too, is I couldn't fit in with being Mexican, and I couldn't fit in with being American. I was not American enough, but I also wasn't Mexican enough, and it's like it leaves you in limbo too, and it's not the greatest feeling.
Yeah, that's like the classic Chicano jumping off point. I feel like is ni de aquí ni de allá.
Yeah.
I know that for a long time that was what I was writing. That was kind of the question that I was
Mm.
asking myself in my writing. It's like, am I from here? Am I from there? What does it mean to be from this middle ground? Um, and I hear you about it being tough to be in limbo. For me, there was something, what I learned, and I think I learned this in part through poetry, was like being a person of diaspora is fucking beautiful. Like being someone who has ties to multiple places, there's something really powerful about that. And I think what helped me like really accept it and love it was meeting people of other diasporas. You know what I mean? Like I had a friend who's Pakistani, and when I read her poems, I was like, wow, like your family also took, you know, takeout boxes to the old country buffet to take home food. You know what I mean? Like your family also stayed at old country buffet for hours until you were kicked out. There was something, I was just like, it's not just us, but there's this diasporic experience that I think is really beautiful and powerful.
Yeah, you both are living the same kind of life and background, but just the environment may be just a tweak, just a little bit. It may be different.
Yeah, the environment just a tweak different, right? The food's slightly different. Um, the language is different, but the experience, I think about it all the time. Like I love anybody who eats rice. You know what I mean? Anybody that eats arroz is my primo. So it doesn't matter to me if it's, Thai food or anything else. Like I just feel, I don't know, I just feel connected because that's what I grew up on was arroz, frijoles, and then, either carne or pollo or something like that.
And then you also have a poem. I'm gonna butcher it, but it's revolt. It's like around tortillas.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, I have a poem called Ode to Tortillas.
or to tortillas? Yeah, and I was listening to, or me and Amber were listening to that on the audiobook version, which was read live, which was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
awesome. I've never like I Amber and I are we're book nerds, we're book bums through and through, and listening to somebody read something live in front of an audience was killer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Um, yeah, I wanted to do it like that because there's an energy that you get at a live poetry reading that sometimes doesn't translate to the audiobook. And so I was like, sure, I'll do an audiobook, but let's see if we can add some energy to it.
Okay, and I think the perfect medium was adding an audience to that, and that was sweet. That was a nice move on your part. But
Thank you.
yeah, and then but to connect that to what we were talking about is that even I mean even tortillas and the way corn is used for that, or flour, it what I'm saying is there's tortillas in different cultures, right? But they don't call them tortillas. They might call them something else. Just like you were saying, like with rice, because a lot of the Asian cultures use rice, but cook different or use differently with other entrees. Middle Eastern with rice, so it's just a little bit different. Even tortillas too.
Yeah, if you think about like pita bread or
Yes.
naan in Indian cultures, yeah, absolutely.
Even al pastor too, right, Amber?
Right. So
Where?
al pastor comes originally from the Middle East. That's why you have it
Yeah.
On the
on the
trompo.
spit,
Yeah.
on the trompo. Yeah, like that comes. I mean, also a lot of Spanish words have that influence, right? Like almohada is from Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask someone who speaks Arabic what their word for pillow is, they'll also say something that sounds like almohada, um, because of that like Arabic to Spain migration, and then the Spanish migration to the Americas, right?
It's just crazy to think how connected we really are as cultures and as people, and then to have like division. Why do you think that there's so much division here? Like especially like in the United States. Why?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer for it. Um, I think, the United States has a particular history, that is grounded in obviously the enslavement of people, and then everything else that happened afterwards that immediately made it like a racialized country, right? In a way that maybe we hadn't seen before. But I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is there's I think that it is a very human reaction to build community.
Right.
And then where that changes into like I need to fight the other community, I don't know exactly where that comes from.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Because that, I mean, we tend to do that, right? And I think even like in like Mexican culture, um, even within ourselves, it's like there's competition. If you're from this state, you're seen better, or if you're lighter, I always remember seeing this thing. It was like a meme, and it said, "In Mexico no hay racismo." So in Mexico, there's no racism. And then
Mhm.
somebody like commented, and they're like, yes, there is. Like, just the simple fact that, um, like there's a division in color and in classism and things like that. And, they're saying like it's just everywhere. And there's a division between people anywhere that you go, but I guess I feel it more here in the US, and maybe because it's where we live, but yeah, I like that kind of your ode to tortillas and how you said like the rice thing. It's like really makes you reflect how connected we really are with other people and other cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things about Chicago is on Mexican Independence weekend. Um, Everybody like cruises through downtown in their cars waving Mexican flags. And eventually they block off the intersection and they start, you know, playing music. But what happens is it's not just Mexicans that come to like check out the scene, right?
Oh,
Also, a lot of Black
Mhm.
Americans will come. And so they'll start footworking and dancing in their style to like
nice.
Mexican music. And it's really beautiful to me. And it's this
Yeah.
moment of like what could be possible, right? I mean, it's true in Chicago that there's often conflict between those communities. But there are these moments where the conflict is set aside and you see like a lot of beautiful things.
Yeah, especially that's one thing to bring people together, and that's art, it's music, it's human interest in creative outlets like music, and especially music from Mexico. Like I don't know many words in Spanish, but if I hear like a song or Mexican music, like, and it sounds good, I'm gonna start dancing.
Yeah,
They could be talking about anything, but uh, it there's something about it. There's something about that art form that that gets me going and brings people together. Um, but your book is I have it right here, ladies and gentlemen. If you're watching on YouTube, there it
hey,
is. Uh, I was scrolling through it and flipping the pages, and I was wondering why there's like two covers in the back, right?
yeah.
Not two covers in the back, but two different covers, slightly different, I think. And I didn't really realize it, but it's in English and Spanish, the book, right? So my question for you, Jose, is what do you write first? Is it English or is it Spanish? Like when you write your poetry, are you starting in English and ending in Spanish, or vice versa, or is it just one language? Like, how do you think? Do you think in Spanish or do you think in English?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, at this point, I think in English, and I can't remember when that happened, but at some point, that's the voice in my head is speaking English now, and I don't know where that happened, but
Hmm.
it makes me sad sometimes to wonder what happened to the voice that used to talk to me in Spanish all the time. Um, when I write in English. And then for this book, I had the poems translated by a poet from Mexico City named
Oh wow.
David Ruano Gonzalez. Um, because, ultimately I didn't study enough in Spanish to be able to translate my own poems.
Oh okay.
Um, so we worked together on the translations,
Oh
but
that's
I
cool.
wanted to have the book in both Spanish and English, in part because as part of my work, I visit a lot of schools and um, I meet parents who are like, I wish we could read your poems with our children, but we only read in Spanish. So now here's a book that they can read together in both Spanish and English.
Oh wow, that's beautiful. I like that.
Yeah, that's the reason why I asked that is I didn't know I didn't understand the concept until I started our relationship, me and Amber. um she'll ask me to do things, but sometimes she forgets that I don't understand Spanish, and she'll ask me to do something in Spanish, and I'm just like, well, hold on, wait, what did you just say? Can you tell me that one more time, please? And sometimes it's like at the wrong time too. We'd be driving somewhere,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's like, is it a right or a left?
And I'm like, izquierda.
Izquierda.
And then it happens that he'll ask me like, well, what does that mean? And then I can't think of the word in English. So it's like
Mm,
my brain it talks and thinks in both languages that sometimes it gets so like intertwined and like meshed that I can't even think in either languages. And it's an odd concept, and I know it sounds weird, but it just happens. And he's like, what's that word? And I'm like, I don't know, I can't think of it in English. And then I have to Google it in Spanish and do all that. And I'm like, English is my native language, but when I combine both, it creates this one language in my brain, and it's odd, but I guess it's great.
yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Language, we think about translation as being like exact, right? There's a word in
Yeah.
English for every word in Spanish, but it doesn't work that way. And also, So for example, right, because Spanish is my first language and is also the Spanish that I use for my family, primarily like I use Spanish to talk to my family and then some friends. Um, it just has different textures, right? That English doesn't have. English is the language of job interviews and you know, it feels a little bit more
Mm.
formal at times. Um, so there's even when I'm saying the same thing in English, it just doesn't carry the same feeling as when I say it in Spanish or the same kind of soul, right? Like
Yeah.
I always think about it like the times when I slip into Spanish when I without thinking about it is often in anger, like when I stub my toe, I'll be like, híjole de la chinga. You know what I mean? Like I just puta madre, like immediately the first things that jump out of my mouth. And I'm like, where does that come from? I don't know. And then I always think about my dad. So yeah, I don't know. It's wild to kind of live and work in multiple languages.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know how you guys do it.
You can barely think in one language.
I can barely think in one language, podcast in one language, speak one language, write in one language, but that's amazing. I mean, but I guess it's like I feel like there's more passion in Spanish language, and then also um we were having a conversation with a friend of ours on the podcast, Chris Burr, and he spoke some Arabic, and he was telling me that how Arabic is just it's he studied languages too, and he said that the Arabic language is so similar, and it's very there's passion involved, and that he said that sometimes he he gets he lived in where did he live? Do you remember, Amber? But it was somewhere in the Middle East where they spoke Arabic, and he said that he was working with some guy, I believe, and this guy, I guess, what told him off or something, and
I remember that.
yeah, you're right. He told him off in Arabic, and he was like he looked at him and he was thinking in his mind, he was like, oh my god, like I felt that, like that just you insulted me, but the passion in the language, just it was beautiful. Like he got insulted, but just like it was just so powerful, and I don't know, that's just, it's wild to me how sounds and sounds coming from your mouth can be totally different than what you're hearing, and translate. It's wild how language is just so powerful like that.
Yeah. I was thinking about it because I don't know if y'all watch wrestling or not.
All the time.
Oh my god, every night he
all the
watches
time.
The WWE, they just had their event in Puerto Rico yesterday.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah, they did a pay-per-view and Bad Bunny came out.
Oh.
And but like they were like booing one of the wrestlers. They were booing Dominic Mysterio.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like calling him huele bicho, which means, like, in Puerto Rican Spanish, it means dick smeller. You know what I mean? Or like he sniffs dick. And I was just like, that is such a creative, hilarious insult. Like, you can't say that in English. Nobody.
Not even in Spanish. What do you say? Hueles pito, and you're like, what? Like it doesn't.
Yeah. In Mexican Spanish, it doesn't work.
Spanish, yeah.
But they're over there like huele bicho, like going crazy. And I was like, damn, that is hilarious.
That's really funny.
And you can tell that you do like wrestling, because there's a Santo mask on the book cover of Promises of Gold. Can you tell me about that? Is that just your love for the sport, and it just, the cover is so amazing. Like it drew me in so much, like your poetry, the writing in there, the passion inside, but the cover is freaking awesome. It's really cool. I love it. Tell me about the creative process with your cover.
Yeah, the cover was made by the design team at Henry Holt, who's the publisher of the book. And they just kind of pulled different images from the poems. And when I saw it, I thought it was perfect. Um, the wrestler is Huracan Ramirez. And one of the things that I love about like luchadores is that they just keep passing the mask down, right? And so even though the
Mm.
original fighter who wore the mask might retire, someone can carry on the legacy and keep performing under the name. So yeah, it just has these different elements that I think kind of capture some of the things that I was talking about in the book.
Okay, you have like a chain on here too. There's, I don't know what kind of flower that is, but
I know that you also talked about what Promises of Gold was, right? In one of your poems. I think you talk about it. Can you tell us like why that name Promises of Gold? What was the
Yeah, the name Promises of Gold comes from, kind of thinking about the American dream and trying to think about all of the promises that a country makes to its people. And so that's part of it, right? Is like, what does it mean to be living under the weight of these different promises that may or may not be fulfilled? But then the other thing that I was thinking about was like, enough with the American dream. What if we create our own like, what does gold mean to us? Like, what are we going to value and really hold up as being meaningful? And so trying to write poems that are trying to redefine, what is valuable to us, what is meaningful to us.
and that's so like it. I guess the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Because maybe your gold may be different than my gold, right? Or it's very subjective,
Oh
and
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, and even may the American dream could be subjective too. Like you, maybe my American dream is totally different than Amber's, or that person to that person. So it gives a like the person. I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but it feels like
it lets them
like you're giving me
interpret it.
hope
Yeah.
in that sense. Like you're giving me a hope of something. I don't know what it is, but it's something.
That's what's up. That's great. I mean, that's perfect. My whole feeling is just like I want to leave people with something that hopefully makes them laugh, something that makes them, think and feel feelings, and then whatever those feelings are, we'll go from there.
Your writing style is I love it because you leave there's comedy in your style, which I like. I've heard um maybe not to I've heard other poets not in to your caliber, but I've heard some, and I don't there's no comedy. Like there's feeling, and I get it. But when I hear your stuff, it's just like there's everything in there. Like it's just there's a mixture of stuff. Like you make the reader think. You make them feel. You give them your perspective. You open up new perspectives for the reader. But then you end it with like a comedy, with a punchline, and then I'm just like, whoa! Like
Yeah.
what does this go like? How did you develop that style, man?
The style just came from a lot of paying attention during performances, right? Like I said, I began writing primarily to perform. And what I noticed was, I mean, when you're a beginning writer, the first thing that you do is you find stuff that you like and then you try to imitate it, right? And so the writers that I loved were people like Willie Perdomo and Sal Williams, these really powerful serious writers, but when I try to perform like them, it wasn't, I think people can kind of tell like what's authentic to you and what's not, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so for whatever reason, people did not necessarily buy those poems from me. But what I found was like in between poems, I would like tell a little joke or be like, this, here goes another sad poem, and people would smile, right? Like they'd laugh, and I'd be like, all right, what if I can add some of those elements into the poetry, and that'll be how I like keep people
Right.
engaged. And so it just came from a lot of listening to the audience, and slowly developing my style.
So do you have bougie cousins that you
No,
that you
I
give
mean,
tortillas to?
no. I made them up, just like the poem says. I don't. If I have bougie cousins, I haven't met them. So, although you know what, some of my cousins will probably become bougie. Like some of my cousins are doing well for themselves, so they're probably gonna become bougie at some point.
That's funny.
Yeah, just lines like that, Jose. They're awesome, and just the style, and you know where to put that line in is nice. Like over time, right? You learn that with experience and practicing and doing and trying new things. That's cool.
Can you tell
Thank
us?
you.
Can you tell us? Because kind of circling back to like way at the beginning when we started, when we talked about writing becoming a career for you. When did that happen? When was that like? All right, writing is my full-time job and it's paying the bills and everything. Like, how can you tell us a little bit about that?
So it happened for me in steps. I started working in poetry probably like a year after I graduated from college. Um, I started working as a teaching artist, and so when you're a teaching artist, schools. I was in Chicago. Schools in Chicago would contact the writing organization that I worked for, and they would be like, we're doing a poetry unit. Can we have someone, teach for 5 weeks at our school? So then I would go and I would teach for 5 weeks. Sometimes it was longer. Um, but I started doing that. And that was another big kind of influence in developing my writing style, because sometimes we would visit schools and the schools would be super well prepared and they'd have an auditorium for us. And sometimes I would visit a school and they'd be like, we have 50 kids in the lunchroom right now. You're not on the schedule, but you can go into the lunchroom. We don't have a mic for you, but if you want to talk to them about poetry, you can go in there right now while they're eating pizza, and good luck to you, right? So I was like, all right, I guess I have to write things that hook people immediately, right? That get their attention, because I could be reading in an auditorium or I could be reading at like teenagers eating lunch. You know what I mean? Um, so that was the first step, kind of building a teaching practice and doing that. After that, I kind of worked in administrative circles. So like I went from teaching in the classroom to kind of doing the administrative work to get teaching artists into the classroom. And then ultimately, after my first book of poems, Citizen Illegal, came out, that's when I started really writing and performing full time.
Wow. How does that feel? How does that feel that you're able to create a life for yourself with your craft and with what like you feel and your writing and everything?
I feel blessed, and it also feels terrifying at times. It kind of feels like, you know, I'm like super proud and excited, and also, uh, sometimes like the gigs come in very steadily and on point, and you're like thankful for that. And then sometimes there are slow periods, and you're like, did I make a mistake? Like there's just there's I I've been trying to think about like when I started writing full time, when I started performing full time and doing, art full time as a career, I was like, oh, I'm going to be so much more productive. I'm going to have so much more time to write and read and think. But it's just like, it's not necessarily true, right? Like now I have to do so much administrative work to take care of the business end that it's just, I don't know, it's wild and not at all like what I thought it was. And still, I'm super thankful for it.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Amber.
No, go ahead.
You won an award for Citizen Illegal back in 2018, right?
Yeah. I won the Chicago Review of Books Poetry Prize.
Wow.
That is super cool. I didn't even know that they had something like that.
Yeah, there's award season really starts in the fall. But there's a bunch of different awards for poetry and for writing in general. So I'm hoping, to be nominated for a few awards. But whatever happens, happens. I feel blessed mostly because
Yeah.
Promises of Gold has gotten shout outs by like a lot of poets and writers that I admire and respect. And the people that have been reviewing it have been primarily like LatiNext people. So for me, like I just feel hella excited that it's reaching the people that I wanted it to reach.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, dude, that's all in your work, man. Like it's hitting. It's hitting. I don't know what else to say, dude. Like even for me and like what we discussed, like I've had a different upbringing. Like I'm fourth or fifth generation. I don't speak as much Spanish as I should. I'm not as connected to my culture as I should be, but reading this book or listening to your poetry on audio, on the audiobook form, like it's connecting and it's drawing something, like just what is in your poetry. It's like shaking me and pulling me and making me connect with it. And
Thank you.
That is just it's weird, but it's working.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's what I hope for, honestly.
That's cool.
How was it like your first going on stage and performing for the first time? Like what was going through your mind? Were you nervous at all? Were you not nervous? Like, tell me about your first time performing.
I was terrified. I still get super nervous before any performance. But now I've done enough performing that I know that it'll be okay, right? I've done it enough times that I know I'm confident that I'll do well. And I'm confident, I know for sure that no matter what happens, even if I bomb, right? Even if like the kids in the lunchroom don't listen to a word I say, like no one's gonna punch me in the face. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it'll be okay. So I have enough experience to continue even though I get nervous and scared.
Dang, so poets they use that word too, bombing? Like I know comics use that word when they go up on stage and they share their comedy and nobody laughs and all they get are crickets or, coughs or whatever. But I didn't know poets had the same concept like that.
I mean, well, for me, like I really love comedy. So I don't know if
Okay.
it's all poets, but I definitely think of like when it doesn't go well, I think of it like
okay.
bombing for sure.
What
yeah.
What are your signs of it didn't go well? How do you know how to identify
What are my
that?
signs? Um, One, if I don't sell a bunch of books after the event, like usually after an event, I'll sell books and I'll have like a line and I'll be signing books and talking to people. Um, so that's one sign. Um, Another sign is if it, because my poems are usually more humorous and there's kind of a mix of like if people aren't laughing, like that's not usually a good sign. If if it just feels kind of awkward and uncomfortable, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then that's when I'm like, all right, I gotta figure something out. So uh but honestly, it's been a while since I've bombed. Like I feel pretty confident in what I'm doing. I know how to work a room, so I feel pretty
Yeah.
good at this point.
Dang. So you're. I mean, just like when you're going on any stage, you're reading the room too, and you're getting a feel for your audience, even when
Oh
performing
yeah.
something like this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way that I work performances is I usually know what my first poem is going to be and what the last poem is going to be. And in between, I just try and figure out what kind of room it is and what the vibe is and then go from there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if if it's a room where it feels a little bit more emotional, maybe I'll read more poems about family. If it's a room that is maybe a little bit more skeptical about poetry, then maybe I'll try to read some of the pieces that are like a little bit funnier, right? I'll read a poem like Eating Taco Bell with Mexicans. Um, I'll just try and play and try to find different moods to try to meet the audience where they're at and kind of think about where I want to push them.
Right. Yeah. That makes total sense because it's the same thing too with even like comedy writing and performing and just knowing when to do a certain poem or when to do a certain joke or when to do a certain song. Okay, I'm getting that now. How do you do you memorize all your poems or do you usually take your book up there with you or like a notepad?
Uh, I do not memorize
No.
anything at this point. I like put sticky notes in the book, and that's
Oh
how I
yeah.
kind of flip through and figure out where I'm going.
Oh okay.
Um,
Do you ever do poetry
but
on the fly?
like freestyle a
Yeah. Do
poem,
you freestyle a poem?
absolutely not.
No.
No, 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 no. I tried telling you, man, like rapping did not work out for me. And so I try to stick to, writing and really taking care with that stuff.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
That's funny. So what do you have in store? I know your book just came out this year, right? It came out this year. But I mean,
Yes,
are
yes.
you on to the next thing or what's your ultimate goal with writing and, putting it out in books? Do you want more books or do you want to reach different audience? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, my goal is to keep writing books. My next book is going to be a novel.
Nice.
So I'm gonna start working on that pretty soon. In the meantime, I'm still doing events and promoting Promises of Gold. My winter tour, I guess you could call it, just wrapped up. I have a few more events, but they're mostly local in New York. But beginning in probably August, September, I'll be back on the road doing events for Promises of Gold. So um, my goal is, my goal is to sell enough books that my wife can quit her job and not have to work anymore. And so
Nice.
that's what I'm working towards.
Nice. I like that.
I like that.
I'm like, I like that goal. No.
That's a
Take
good
some
goal.
notes. No.
I'm taking mental notes right now. I'm trying to memorize what Jose It's telling us right now. But that's good because I bought 2 books today. I'm just letting you know.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have to add the audiobook too. So there's 3. Which I'm gonna give one of these books out to one of our listeners and one of our fans. So I don't know exactly how we're gonna do that, Amber, but right, we're gonna figure out something. We're gonna do a book giveaway.
Yeah, we
Promises of Gold.
We liked it so much, and it resonated so much with us that I think that we're only doing it justice by sharing it with somebody
absolutely.
else. And you did an amazing job on it again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one of you lucky listeners, fans, are gonna get one of these Promises of Gold by José Olivarez. And Jose, thank you for coming out and doing the podcast and spending an hour of your time and sharing your creative process and your just overall your headspace. And I appreciate it. And go ahead and tell everyone where we can find you and what do you have coming up next?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me online at joseolivares.com. My Instagram and Twitter are both @_Jose Olivares. My book of poems is called Promises of Gold. I also have a collaborative photo book with Tony Salazar called Por Siempre. You can get BreakBeat Poets Volume 4 LatiNext at all stores. You can get Citizen Illegal from Haymarket Books. Yeah, get multiple copies of every book. They're good. I promise. I did a good job. I tried my best. I think you'll like them. But yeah, I appreciate the time and thank you so much for the conversation.
No, thank you.
The audiobook is awesome too. I mean, if you want to hear Jose doing it live, like go check it out on the audiobook form.
I forgot to ask this. We gotta have you on again because I had so many more questions.
Anytime. Also, the studio looks great. I'm like, I gotta come visit y'all in person. It looks dope where you are.
Yes. Yeah. Well, when you're visiting LA, we'll send a lift for you or something. We'll have the Mind Buzz limo meet you at LAX or something. But yeah, we got to work that in.
Absolutely. I would love it.
Cool. Everything looks so good.
The Mind Buzz Podcast.
Peace and love.
Bye.
See you guys later.